Life is not easy, I know it. It challenges us in countless difficult ways. And there are times when you fail yourselves, especially when you fail to rise to the challenge. You may have failed others, the people who trusted you or expected more than you could give at that point in time. It is hard and you judge yourself. You feel guilty. You dislike yourself. But forgiveness, especially forgiveness towards oneself, is an essential gateway to live a peaceful life. When you forgive, you actually bow to this immensity called life. Today, I invite you to travel with me on this path of forgiving oneself. Will you journey with me? Namaste. When I was young, the story of Shravana Kumara saddened me very deeply. But then later I thought of the immense torment that Dasharatha must have gone through because he had killed such a noble and young lad on whom his parents were dependent for their very survival. Dasharatha must have been a broken man with his confidence shattered. Strangely, much later in life, Dasharatha had to hurt another young and noble man who was equally devoted to his parents. And just that this time it happened to be his own most beloved son, Rama. The guilt and grief were so intense that he had sent away such a noble and innocent son that he eventually died of heartache. The first time Dasharatha hurt Shravana, it was an unconscious action. The second time Dasharatha hurt Sri Rama, it was a conscious but a helpless action. When you hurt an innocent person unconsciously, or when you hurt your loved ones helplessly, it is very challenging to forgive oneself. And this sometimes happens in life. I have seen people judge themselves for the rest of their lives because of this. At other times, you hurt people with your words and your actions because you get caught in this whirlwind of inner states of anger, violence, fear, hate, and greed, and then you lose control. And in other instances, perhaps you have not hurt others, but you have disappointed yourself with the irresponsibility or say when lethargy. Whatever it is, you need to cross this inner torment and you need to move into a state of forgiveness for yourself. When you don't forgive yourself, you unconsciously inflict punishment on yourself, manifesting as a disease or manifesting as a crisis. When I talk about forgiveness, I'm often asked a question. Should we not feel remorse? Should we not feel guilty? Should we not repent for what we have done? Well, Sri Krishnaji and I have a very different view on this. We don't worship guilt. We don't provoke guilt in people, nor do we encourage people to feel guilty. What is guilt? Guilt is fundamentally beating up yourself for some wrong action you did or for some right you did not do. And in this entire process of guilt and remorse, you end up hating yourself. You end up fearing God's punishment. Fear and guilt often go together. You fear God's punishment. You fear bad karma coming to you. Or you fear the loss of an image. You simply can't separate the two. Fear and guilt, we can say, are inseparable cousins. You become a more conflicted human being as a result of guilt. Now tell me, who is kinder and who's a more caring human being of the two? The one who is conflicted and fearful, or the one who is peaceful? In conflict, you become unwise. In conflict, your thoughts merely go in circles without ever taking a break. And you arrive at unwise solutions. That is why the path we lead seekers on is one of liberation from guilt. It is the awakening of the heart. A medical doctor came to Ekam to go through an inner journey. And in the process, the divine took him to an event that he knew, but he did not ever have the courage to move and see it. He was an 8-year-old boy, and he was playing the gilli danda on the street with his friends. A game, I'm sure you're aware of this game, that's played with a small and a big wooden stick. It is a very ancient game. It's even mentioned in Mahabharata. It's probably a precursor to the modern cricket. We never know. He was an expert, and his cousins and friends decided to go out and beat him at the game. And during the game, one of his cousins rushed forward to catch the gilli when it hit his eye. And in days after, he came to know that the cousin had lost his vision in one of his eyes. Over the days, his family and his relatives gave him a very disgusting look, completely ignored him. His parents, unable to face his aunt, constantly reprimanded him, advised him. His uncle, to whom usually he went to for love, looked at him very wistfully and said, "Looks like you have it in you to hurt people. Be careful." And those words from his uncle were like the final nail into the coffin. He stopped playing that day. No one cared for his guilt, for his fear, for his shame. Nor did he grieve, because he was choked by all the judgments that came at him from everyone who walked into their home. And in the process, in the deep inner journey at Ekam, for the first time, he cried like a little boy for the wound that he had inflicted on his cousin, for his own hurt, and also for his lost childhood. This painful childhood experience had become a very powerful samskara in his unconscious. Samskaras are impressions of past experiences. They are much deeper than memories. They are imprints in your unconscious mind. Hurting experiences that happen in childhood can lead to impressions that can lead to repetitive patterns throughout one's life. Even though he had not consciously tried to remember the event, the painful samskara of "I will hurt people who get close to me" became his constant judgment of himself. He felt fearful of getting close to people. He becomes distant, he becomes isolated. In fact, his choice of career was also an effort to atone for his guilt. He had suffered endlessly with his judgmental mind. Strangely, whenever he tried to care for people, it would not go well for him. Something disrupting would happen again and again, and then he would move into a shell. People would either express their disappointments or they would get hurt in his care. This pattern kept repeating again and again, reinforcing the feeling of lack of love within. During the mystic process, he was taken back to those moments in his childhood. The divine embraced the 8-year-old, healed his wounds in the heart. In the process, over the days, he saw life as a great karmic flow in which he and his cousins were all brought together in that moment. In that experience at Ekam, the burden left him. He was filled with peace and stillness, something that he had not felt earlier. In the months or after the process, his pattern in the external world begins to change. He does not lose relationships anymore. And over the years, he has evolved into a very compassionate doctor, a very intuitive doctor. I want you to understand that an authentic forgiving oneself actually breaks the flow of negative karmic energy. It allows for a new and a more harmonious flow of life to emerge. Do you understand the power of forgiving oneself? It breaks the whole karmic loop that can go on, resulting in punishing yourself. There is yet another classical example of forgiving oneself in Ramayana. There's a story of Ahalya. Ahalya, the youthful wife of sage Gautama. She falls into the trap of Indra and commits infidelity. And when her husband and her son come to know of this, they abandon her and go away. Ramayana says she became a stone, or that she became invisible. And she reacquired her human form and her family because of Sri Rama's touch. What does this actually mean? Ahalya's heart became stone-like in guilt and shame. The once radiant and respected woman withdrew from the world as a punishment for herself. She grieved the alienation of her loved ones. And this entire karmic cycle came to an end when she experienced the compassion of Sri Rama. Sri Rama helped herself transcend her self-loathing and self-judgment and brought peace to her soul. And this transformation in her consciousness also ended the negative karmic consequence in her life and made her husband and her child return back to her life with love. Forgiving oneself is a crucial milestone for every human being on earth. The many wounds in your heart must be healed. Your heart must awaken to compassion for yourself. Remember, the mistakes of your life occurred either unknowingly or when you were carried by destructive emotional states like that of Ahalya or Dasharatha. One practice that will help you on this path is to really contemplate and recognize those destructive emotional states from which you perform erroneous actions that hurt others. That self-knowing, that understanding and awareness of your state of mind will form the bedrock of your transformation. Naturally, you become more kind and you are less fault-finding. Ultimately, if you truly know to forgive yourself, you will also radiate a loving understanding to your fellow human beings.
Let me tell you a story. This is an incident that happened in the life of Buddha. Once Buddha was in an assembly when a man walked in looking furious. He thought Buddha was doing something wrong. He was drawing a huge crowd and people would just go to him and meditate. He was a restless businessman and he had found that his children were spending their time with Buddha when they could have engaged themselves in business, making more money and ensuring their livelihood. He felt that spending 4 hours of the day seated next to someone whose eyes were always closed was a complete waste of time. So he was very upset. And with anger in his heart, he walked confidently up to Buddha. As soon as he approached Buddha, all his thoughts disappeared, but the anger in him did not dissipate. He was shaking in anger, but he found himself speechless. Since he was unable to express his emotions in words, he simply spat on Buddha's face. Buddha, in return, simply smiled. His disciples who were sitting with him were furious. They wanted to react, but the Buddha's presence didn't allow them to do so. They just couldn't believe someone could behave in such a disrespectful manner with the Buddha, but they couldn't say anything. And this man could not stay long either. He noticed his action had not drawn any reaction from the people around him, and the Buddha had simply smiled in return. So he walked away. Once he returned home, this man couldn't erase the image of the smiling Buddha from his mind. For the first time in his life, he had met someone who had given such an extraordinary response to such a disrespectful act. He could not sleep all night, and his whole body transformed. He was shivering, shaking. He felt as though he was breaking within, and his world had collapsed. The next day, he went and fell at Buddha's feet and said, "Please forgive me. I did not know what I was doing." To which Buddha replied, "I cannot forgive you." Everyone, including Buddha's disciples, was shocked at these words that Buddha uttered. All his life, Buddha had been so compassionate. He had accepted everyone regardless of their past. And now he was telling this man that he could not forgive his behavior. Buddha explained, "Why should I forgive you when you have not done anything?" The businessman replied, "Yesterday I came to this assembly, and in my anger, I spat on your face. I am the same person." Buddha placed his palm upon his heart and said, "That person is not here anymore. If I ever meet the person on whom you spat, I will tell him to forgive you." So, what truly is forgiveness? What does it take for one to forgive someone? Let us go deeper into it today. Namaste. I have listened to the lives of thousands of people in the spiritual intensives I lead around the world. And most people hold hate for someone or the other. Probably for most of you, hate is a strong word. Most of you would rather prefer to describe your experience as a strong dislike or anger or resentment towards somebody who has caused you emotional pain or loss. Let us remove our focus from words and expressions and get to the actual inner experience. When someone lets you down, when someone takes away something precious to you, when someone betrays your trust in them, when someone dislikes you or hates you, when someone has constantly been insensitive, rude, or disrespectful towards you, what do you feel within? How do you feel? Take a moment to recognize your inner state. Whether it is resentment that builds over several months and years, or despise and rage that flares instantaneously, I want you to know that every form of hate is inner violence directed towards another. As you immerse yourself deeper and deeper in these feelings of animosity towards another, you lose yourself. You come to a point when you become a stranger to yourself. There are 4 kinds of responses that you could give when you are gripped by inner violence. I want to describe these responses through different characters in the great Indian epic Mahabharata. Duryodhana and Dharmaraja both felt wronged. Duryodhana because he was denied of ruling the entire kingdom, even though he was the eldest son of the family, just because he was born to a blind man. He hated the idea of his kingdom being divided and given away to his much hated cousins. There was a fire of revenge that was seething within him. Dharmaraja was also wronged because his rightful kingdom was taken away from him. His wife was humiliated in front of the entire court, and their kingdom was not returned to them, even though they endured unimaginable hardships for 13 years in exile. Is this not what happens in a hurting relationship? Both parties, you have a logic for why you are right and why you were wronged by the other, and the other too has his or her logic for why they are right and you wronged them. Anger and antagonism does not dissolve by measuring who is more right and who is more wrong. It never dissolves that way. Now let us see how both these warriors gave a totally different response to each other and to life. Let us look into their responses. The character of Duryodhana reflected the path of indulgence that much of humanity takes. He was angry and jealous from childhood, and over the years, it turned into resentment and hate because of the continuous injustice he perceived was meted out to them. He was waiting for the right opportunity to strike back and finish his cousins. He spent every waking hour visiting and revisiting the injustice he perceived was done to him. His anger, hate, and animosity was like a wound that he never allowed to heal. He kept on meddling with the wound by constantly revisiting in his mind, by constantly talking about it to people. He kept stoking up the fire of hate in himself, recounting his humiliations to his best friend and brothers over and over again so that it never died out. And in fact, it became a monster that did not allow him to sleep or wake peacefully. And when the time arrived, they unleashed this hate as violence during the war. This path of indulgence is what is trodden by most people because they are unconscious. They are not conscious of the destructive impact of their words and actions unleashed in a state of hate. Then we have Dharmaraja, the eldest cousin and competitor to the throne. He refused to fan the fire of hate. He knew that actions arising from hate would destroy individuals and break down families and society. He knew that when two powerful people hated each other, the consequence will be suffered by many, many innocents. The path he took was to follow the path of forgiveness. He lived peacefully through all the trials and difficulties of his life. He was like a balm and a beacon for so many. I am not saying Dharmaraja was without flaws, but his greatest strength was his ability to let go of bitterness and forgive his enemies. He tried to avoid war in a million ways. Unfortunately, there were too many people on his side and Duryodhana's side who wanted war, and war became inevitable. Remember this: your hurt hurts you, your forgiveness frees you. Your hurt hurts you, your forgiveness frees you. Forgiveness is never about the other, it is about your own freedom. Please know that if you lived in an inner state of war, externally too, you will be warring. If you internally lived in a state of peace, externally too, situations would dissolve themselves and peace will flow. One of the leaders I mentor is a woman who was in a very conflicting relationship with her husband. As Sri Preethaji and I led her on the path of enlightenment, there came a point where all bitterness disappeared from her heart. She was established in a state of great peace. When she went back home, her husband suggested divorce. She did not refuse it. But when he wanted to involve the lawyers, she said that they could separate peacefully without any lawyers. In fact, when her husband asked what part of the property she wanted, she told him that she would take whatever he gave her with a blessing in his heart. Her husband was deeply impacted by her peace and evolution. Together, they held two companies over the years. Even after the divorce, they still hold the companies jointly. They vacation with their children as a family. They are now the best of friends, even though they are divorced as husband and wife. If you can realize the pain that anger and animosity inflicts upon you and all your loved ones, you will let go of it. Remember, letting go of hurt is forgiveness. Remember, life is like a river with so many bends and turns. If you can let go of anger, disappointment, and hate whenever they arise, and you live in a powerful state of peace, your life will be like a miracle. What someone has wrongfully taken from you, life will give you back. The love you have lost will come back through so many avenues. Remember, I am not preaching forgiveness, nor am I asking you never to go to court. All I am saying is stay in the realization that your hurt hurts you, your forgiveness frees you. Namaste. Have a beautiful day in a beautiful state.